"Do not laugh," the old Marine whispered without taking his eyes off the screen. Every army that ever laughed at a tank ended up writing history from the losing side. Across the galaxy, millions ignored that warning. They laughed anyway. The live broadcast from the Orion Defense Exposition was breaking every viewing record ever set. Representatives from more than 200 civilizations filled the enormous observation galleries, their attention fixed on the polished proving grounds stretching nearly 15 miles across the valley below. The event had been advertised for months as the first multinational demonstration of modern battlefield technology. Every major military power had arrived eager to show off its newest breakthroughs. There were sleek hover platforms that floated without a sound, autonomous drone swarms moving with perfect precision, shimmering energy barriers that could stop incoming fire before it ever reached its target, and laser batteries capable of striking a target almost instantly from miles away. The commentators spoke with absolute confidence. According to nearly every military analyst, conventional armored warfare had been obsolete for centuries. Steel belonged in museums. Tracks belonged in history books. Humanity, the newest major military participant, was expected to unveil something equally futuristic. Rumors had spread for weeks that Earth had secretly developed a revolutionary energy weapon capable of changing the balance of power forever. Instead, as the massive gateway opened with a low mechanical rumble, every conversation stopped for exactly 1 second before the laughter began. Rolling through the dust came a column of heavy tracked vehicles built from thick slabs of steel. Their engines growled instead of hummed. Their turrets turned with deliberate confidence instead of graceful elegance. They looked almost primitive compared to everything else on the field. A reporter from the Altari network struggled to hide a smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "it appears the human delegation has brought tanks." The audience erupted. Some delegates openly applauded the joke. Others recorded the scene, already preparing sarcastic headlines before the demonstration had even started. One alien officer leaned toward his colleague and said loud enough for nearby microphones to capture, "Perhaps Earth misunderstood the invitation. The history exhibit is next week." Even a few younger human observers shifted awkwardly in their seats. They knew exactly what those machines represented, but they also knew how impossible this looked. Why would Earth bring tracked armor into an arena designed to showcase the most advanced laser systems ever created? On the command platform overlooking the range, Ambassador Rebecca Hayes stood beside a quiet man wearing a plain field jacket with a faded American flag stitched onto one shoulder. Captain Jack Sullivan rested both hands behind his back, his expression calm enough to make people wonder if he had missed the joke entirely. Rebecca glanced toward him. "They're enjoying themselves." Jack watched another camera drone circle overhead before answering. "Good." She looked surprised. "You're not bothered?" He gave the smallest shrug. People usually laugh right before they start paying attention. Across the valley, the Supreme Defense Marshal of the Varex Dominion stepped forward beneath the bright lights. His voice echoed through every translator across the stadium. "Human representative, our laser divisions are prepared. If your armored vehicles require additional time before retirement, we are willing to delay the demonstration." More laughter rolled through the stands. Jack pressed a small button on his headset, listening for a brief confirmation from the crews inside every waiting vehicle. One after another, calm American voices answered exactly as expected. Every crew was ready. Every engine was steady. Every commander understood the assignment. Jack looked toward the distant line of steel stretching across the valley and allowed himself the faintest smile. Then he raised his eyes to the marshal and answered in a voice so ordinary that it somehow silenced the crowd. "We appreciate the offer." He paused just long enough for every translator to finish. "Please begin whenever you're ready." Captain Jack Sullivan had never trusted a battlefield that looked too clean. As the laughter echoed across the observation decks, he kept watching the terrain instead of the crowd. 15 miles of packed earth stretched ahead, interrupted only by scattered rock formations, shallow ridges, and a series of reinforced target zones that every participant had been instructed to cross. To everyone else, it was a stage. To Jack, it was ground that would eventually tell the truth. Rebecca Hayes folded her arms and leaned closer. "You really expected this reaction, did not you?" Jack gave a slow nod. Every generation believes the last war was the final lesson. It never is. She smiled faintly. You sound like my grandfather. Mine said the same thing. Jack glanced toward the waiting line of tanks. Every crew knew exactly what the galaxy thought of them. That was part of the plan. Years before becoming commander of Earth's Armored Task Force, Jack had grown up outside Fort Cavazos, Texas. His earliest memories were not of spaceships or orbital stations. They were of climbing onto old steel hulls while his father explained why armor was never about looking impressive. Steel buys time, his father always said. Time lets good people make better decisions. Back then, Jack had not understood. As a teenager, he believed sleek aircraft and advanced missiles were the future. Tanks looked slow, loud, old. Then he enlisted. Combat exercises taught him something no simulator ever could. Technology failed. Batteries died. Networks collapsed. Weather ruined perfect plans. Dust clogged sensors. Equipment broke at the worst possible moment. But a well-maintained machine built to survive punishment kept moving when everything else quit. Those lessons followed him through every assignment until he was eventually selected to command the experimental armored division that most people inside Earth's own military quietly mocked. Even now, several young officers sitting inside the command bunker watched the alien broadcasts with uncomfortable expressions. Lieutenant Noah Brooks finally broke the silence over the secure radio. Captain, permission to ask a stupid question? Jack answered immediately. Those are usually the useful ones. Noah hesitated. What if they are right? The channel stayed quiet for several seconds. Jack could almost picture the young officer staring through his viewport, wondering whether he had just driven into the biggest embarrassment in military history. You think those lasers are going to cut straight through us? Jack asked. Yes, sir. They might. Noah sounded surprised. Sir. Jack smiled to himself. Every machine has a weakness. Ours does too. The difference is we know ours. They have never looked for theirs. Around the proving grounds, alien analysts continued presenting confident predictions. Sophisticated graphics estimated the survival time of each human vehicle. One expert confidently announced that no tracked platform could remain operational against sustained laser engagement for more than 40 seconds. Another claimed humanity had entered the demonstration purely for political symbolism. Rebecca listened to the commentary through her earpiece before quietly removing it. They have already declared a winner. Jack adjusted the cuffs of his jacket. That saves us the trouble. High above the valley, the marshal raised one hand. Thousands of camera drones shifted into perfect formation. Every major news network focused on the line of silent human tanks waiting below. The countdown clock appeared across every broadcast in the known galaxy. 10, 9, 8. Inside each armored vehicle, American crews performed the same final routine they had practiced hundreds of times. They checked gauges, confirmed coolant pressure, verified ammunition status, tightened harnesses. Nobody made speeches. Nobody talked about glory. One driver from Ohio quietly said, "See everybody after this." His commander answered with a calm laugh. "You are buying dinner." Jack listened to those ordinary voices and felt something stronger than confidence. He felt familiarity. These were mechanics, parents, veterans, former ranch kids, college graduates, and National Guard volunteers. They were not counting on miracles. They were counting on preparation. As the countdown reached 1, Jack took one last look at the line of steel waiting beneath the morning sun and thought of something his father had told him decades earlier. The strongest weapon on any battlefield was never the newest one. It was the one everyone else had already stopped respecting. The first tone echoed across the proving grounds, deep and mechanical, signaling that the demonstration had officially begun. Every display in the stadium switched to tactical view as brilliant lines of simulated laser fire streaked across the valley with breathtaking speed. To the audience, it looked beautiful, almost artistic. Thin beams of blue and white light crossed the open ground with impossible precision, each one guided by targeting systems that calculated millions of variables every second. The commentators sounded almost bored. They had seen this kind of performance countless times. The only mystery left, according to them, was how long the human vehicles would last. Captain Jack Sullivan watched the first impacts through a pair of old binoculars instead of the advanced tactical display mounted beside him. Rebecca Hayes noticed and smiled. "You really trust those over military sensors?" Jack lowered them just enough to answer. "Sensors tell me what computers think happened. These tell me what actually happened. A bright flash rolled across the front of the formation as the leading tanks disappeared behind clouds of dust and drifting smoke. Several alien delegates applauded, convinced the exercise had already been decided. The marshal folded his hands behind his back with quiet satisfaction. Remarkably predictable, he said to the officers standing beside him. Primitive armor was always going to fail against focused light. Then the dust began to settle. One by one, dark shapes emerged from the haze. Every tank was still moving. Slow, steady, unhurried. Fresh scratches covered the outer armor. Dust coated every surface. A few external cameras had gone dark, but the formation had not broken. It had not even slowed. A ripple of confused whispers spread across the observation decks. The lead commentator stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. His co-host stared at the tactical screen, blinking several times before quietly asking, "Is the telemetry delayed?" Engineers hurried to verify the data. The numbers came back exactly the same. Rebecca looked toward Jack. "You expected this too." He nodded once. "They built weapons to destroy shields. We brought something that does not depend on one." Inside the lead tank, Sergeant Michael Carter rested one hand lightly against the steel interior as the vehicle continued forward. The crew barely reacted to the impacts outside. Driver Olivia Brooks adjusted course by a few feet around a shallow crater. Gunner Daniel Foster took a sip of coffee from a secured travel mug before placing it back into its holder. Loader Chris Ramirez checked instrument readings and calmly called them out. Engine temperature normal. Hydraulic pressure steady. Suspension green across the board. Michael smiled. "Sounds like another Tuesday." Their voices stayed relaxed because nothing they were seeing surprised them. Every result matched years of testing conducted far away from cameras and politics. Back in the command tower, several alien officers leaned over holographic displays searching for an explanation. One suggested the humans had secretly developed an unknown energy shield. Another insisted the telemetry had been corrupted. A third quietly admitted that no shield signatures had been detected at all. The answer made even less sense. They were simply driving through it. Jack listened without interrupting. He had heard the same theories during classified intelligence briefings years earlier. Humanity had studied every major military doctrine in known space and discovered one assumption that every civilization shared. They all believed the fastest path to victory was making armor unnecessary. Earth had reached the opposite conclusion. If weapons became more powerful every decade, survivability mattered even more. The countdown clock continued running as the line of tanks crossed another 1,000 feet without hesitation. For the first time since the demonstration began, nobody in the stadium laughed. The smiles faded. The confident predictions stopped. Across the valley, the steel convoy continued its quiet advance, and an uncomfortable question settled over every military mind watching the broadcast. What if humanity had not fallen behind the future at all? What if it had simply prepared for a different one? The silence inside the stadium lasted only a few seconds before it gave way to something far more dangerous than laughter. Curiosity. Military officers who had spent entire careers believing they understood modern warfare suddenly leaned closer to their displays instead of reclining comfortably in their seats. The Supreme Defense Marshal no longer smiled. He spoke quietly to the technicians behind him. "Increase output by 20%. Narrow the beam spread. I want continuous contact." The order moved through the command network almost instantly. Far across the proving grounds, the laser platforms adjusted their positions with perfect mechanical precision. Their emitters glowed brighter as cooling systems worked harder to sustain the increased energy flow. Every analyst expected the next sequence to settle the debate once and for all. Rebecca Hayes watched the tactical display update beside her. "They are pushing the systems harder." Jack Sullivan slipped his hands into his jacket pockets as though they were discussing tomorrow's weather instead of the largest military demonstration in recorded history. "That means they are following the script." Rebecca looked at him. "What script?" Jack answered without taking his eyes off the valley. When something does not work, people usually try more of it before they question the idea itself. The second wave arrived with remarkable accuracy. Brilliant beams swept across the advancing formation from multiple angles at once, maintaining constant pressure instead of quick bursts. The audience expected to see confusion inside the human column. Instead, something else happened. Thin gray clouds began rolling from the sides of every vehicle. They were not thick enough to hide the tanks completely. They drifted low across the ground, spreading naturally with the breeze. Alien commentators struggled to explain what viewers were watching. "Is that smoke?" one asked in disbelief. Another analyst quickly dismissed the idea. Smoke is an obsolete battlefield concept. Modern targeting systems are unaffected by simple visual concealment. Jack heard the conversation through the open broadcast feed and quietly smiled. They still think they know what they are looking at. Inside the lead vehicle, Sergeant Michael Carter glanced toward a small diagnostic screen. Reflective layer is stable. Driver Olivia Brooks nodded, while keeping both hands steady on the controls. Cooling system holding. Gunner Daniel Foster looked over fresh telemetry. Surface temperature dropping faster than predicted. Loader Chris Ramirez chuckled. Looks like the old engineers earned their paychecks. None of them sounded excited. The numbers matched years of testing conducted deep inside Nevada and Alaska, where Earth had spent decades experimenting with materials that never appeared in public defense budgets. They had never assumed lasers were weak. They simply assumed lasers generated heat, and heat could be managed if someone stopped trying to solve the wrong problem. In the observation gallery, an elderly historian from the Keldron Republic slowly stood from his seat. He had spent more than 60 years studying ancient human conflicts. His translator activated as he spoke almost to himself. Steel, ceramics, thermal coatings, layered composites. The younger officers around him turned in confusion. "Professor." He kept staring at the moving convoy. "We believed humanity abandoned those sciences. We were mistaken. They perfected them." The realization spread quietly from one military delegation to another. Human armor was not surviving because it was stronger than laser technology. It was surviving because it had been built specifically to exploit assumptions that nobody else had questioned for centuries. The proving grounds were no longer demonstrating superior firepower. They were exposing intellectual blind spots. Rebecca folded her arms and exhaled slowly. "They are finally starting to understand." Jack gave a small shake of his head. "Not yet." She looked at him with a puzzled expression. "Then what are they seeing?" His answer came almost as a whisper. "Right now they think they have underestimated our armor." He watched another line of tanks continue their steady advance without changing speed. They still have not realized the armor was never the surprise. Across the valley, warning lights began appearing inside several alien command stations as continuous laser output pushed cooling systems closer to operational limits. Engineers rushed between consoles searching for answers that should have existed long before today. For the first time in generations, the most advanced military alliance in the galaxy found itself asking a question that every young mechanic inside a human motor pool already knew. What happens when the machine you built for perfect conditions meets one designed to keep working after perfection disappears? Captain Jack Sullivan reached for the radio without taking his eyes off the advancing column. His voice stayed calm, almost conversational. "Iron Protocol. Execute." There was no dramatic countdown. No speeches. One by one, acknowledgements came back from the crews. Iron 1 copies. Iron 3 copies. Iron 7 copies. Then the convoy changed in ways that most people watching could barely recognize. Panels hidden beneath the outer armor shifted into place. Cooling vents redirected airflow through channels buried deep inside the hulls. Fine metallic particles mixed with the drifting gray haze already hanging over the valley, creating a shimmering curtain that was almost invisible to the naked eye but looked very different through advanced targeting sensors. The Marshal narrowed his eyes as fresh data poured across his display. "Target lock confidence has dropped 12%. One of his officers frowned. "That should not be possible. Their signatures are still directly in front of us." "Increase tracking resolution." "Already trying, sir." Another technician looked up from his console. "Surface temperatures are fluctuating faster than our prediction models allow." The Marshal folded his arms. For the first time that morning, he stopped looking at the tanks and started looking at the engineers behind the data. Something about the numbers bothered him more than the vehicles themselves. Rebecca Hayes quietly watched the alien command center, growing more restless. "They are chasing the symptoms." Jack nodded. "Exactly. What are they missing?" "They think the laser is the center of the battle." He looked toward the convoy. It never was. Inside Iron 1, Sergeant Michael Carter listened as the laser warning indicators continued flashing across his screen. Driver Olivia Brooks guided the 70-ton vehicle around another rocky ridge without changing speed. Still smooth, she said. Daniel Foster compared incoming sensor data against training records. Heat distribution is matching Arizona test range results within 3%. Chris Ramirez laughed softly. I never thought I would be happy to hear that. Michael rested one hand on the steel wall beside him. People think armor wins fights. He shook his head. Armor buys time. Time lets us think. Those words reminded Jack of another conversation years earlier inside a small testing facility outside Yuma. A young civilian engineer had stood beside an unfinished prototype and asked a simple question. What if we stop trying to build armor that cannot be hit? The room had gone quiet. Every defense contractor had spent decades making vehicles harder to detect. Faster, smarter, more automated. The engineer kept talking. Lasers do not care how expensive your electronics are. They care about heat. So why not build something that treats heat like rain instead of bullets? Most people dismissed the idea. Jack never did. Earth invested quietly while the rest of the galaxy invested loudly. The results were rolling across the proving grounds right now. Another burst of laser fire swept over the convoy. External paint darkened. Dust exploded into the air. A few antennas folded away automatically after taking direct contact. Yet every tank continued forward in perfect formation. No panic, no rushing, just steady movement measured in feet instead of spectacle. Across the observation decks, military delegates who had spent their entire lives studying directed energy warfare stopped taking notes and simply watched. An elderly admiral from the No-Ran Alliance leaned toward his aide. When was the last time we trained against a heavily armored ground force? The aide searched his tablet before answering quietly. According to our archives, approximately 418 years ago. The admiral slowly lowered the tablet from his hands. Then we have not been preparing for war. He kept watching the human convoy close the distance yard by yard. We have only been preparing for each other. Jack heard another comm status report over the radio. Every crew sounded exactly as they had before the first shot was fired. Ordinary Americans doing an extraordinary job with remarkable discipline. He smiled to himself because the real demonstration had finally begun. The galaxy had spent centuries proving its weapons were becoming more advanced. Humanity had spent the same centuries asking a different question entirely. What survives after the first perfect plan falls apart? The convoy crossed another half-mile without changing its pace. And that was the moment Captain Jack Sullivan knew the battle had shifted from the proving grounds into the minds of everyone watching. Steel had never been the point. The point was doubt. Once doubt found its way into an enemy's thinking, every decision became slower. Every assumption had to be questioned. Rebecca Hayes watched fresh reports flood across her tablet. The commentators are changing their language, she said quietly. An hour ago they called our vehicles obsolete. Now they are calling them unconventional. Jack smiled. That is how every bad prediction dies. First they laugh. Then they rename what they do not understand. The alien command center was no longer calm. Officers moved quickly between tactical stations while engineers compared sensor logs from multiple laser batteries. Nothing matched the models they had trusted for generations. Their weapons were operating exactly as designed. Their targeting systems were performing within acceptable limits. Their crews had made no measurable mistakes. Yet the human formation kept advancing one deliberate yard at a time. The marshal leaned over a holographic display. Run another simulation. A technician looked uncomfortable. We already have, sir. Then run it again. The outcome does not change. Explain it. The technician hesitated before answering. I cannot. Those two words settled over the room like a heavy weight. Military organizations rarely feared defeat as much as they feared uncertainty. Across the valley, Sergeant Michael Carter listened as another status report came through the crew intercom. Track assemblies holding. Cooling reserves at 91%. Primary optics remain clear. Michael nodded with quiet satisfaction. Good work. Keep driving. Olivia Brooks glanced at the timer mounted above her station. You know what is funny? She asked. Daniel Foster looked over from the targeting console. What? Everybody thinks this demonstration is about tanks. Chris Ramirez laughed. It never was. Michael rested his helmet against the back of his seat for a moment. It is about people. Nobody argued because they all understood exactly what he meant. The machines mattered, but the people inside them mattered more. Every crew member had spent years learning how to solve problems after something broke. They trained without satellite navigation. They trained without automated targeting. They trained with missing sensors, damaged communications, and changing weather because experience had taught them one simple lesson. Real life never followed the manual. Years earlier, during a closed planning session beneath the Pentagon, a young analyst had asked Jack why Earth refused to build an army that depended entirely on artificial intelligence. Jack had answered with a story instead of a technical briefing. He told them about helping his father repair an old pickup truck on a hot Saturday afternoon in Texas. They had no diagnostic computer, no digital assistant, just tools, patience, and experience. If you only know how to fix perfect machines, his father had told him, you will be helpless when life gives you broken ones. Jack carried that lesson into every military meeting afterward. Earth did not reject advanced technology. It simply refused to become dependent on it. The convoy continued rolling forward beneath the afternoon sun, while thousands of alien observers slowly realized they were witnessing two completely different philosophies of war. One side believed victory belonged to the civilization with the most advanced systems. The other believed victory belonged to the people who could keep adapting after those systems reached their limits. Rebecca lowered her tablet and looked at Jack. They still think they are studying our equipment. Jack watched the crews disappear behind another cloud of drifting dust before quietly answering. No. He shook his head almost imperceptibly. Today they are studying humanity. They just have not realized it yet. The last mile changed everything. Until now, the galaxy had been watching a demonstration. Now it was watching a military doctrine come apart in real time. Captain Jack Sullivan stood perfectly still as fresh telemetry appeared across the command display. The distance between the human convoy and the objective markers continued shrinking at the exact pace his operations team had predicted months earlier. Rebecca Hayes looked at the latest reports arriving from neutral observers. Several delegations are requesting access to our engineering papers. Jack let out a quiet laugh. 6 hours ago, they would not have accepted them if we had handed them out for free. Across the valley, frustration began replacing confidence inside the alien command center. The Supreme Defense Marshal watched warning icons spread across multiple laser arrays. Continuous firing had forced cooling cycles far beyond their normal operating patterns. One battery temporarily shut itself down for safety. Then another followed. An engineer spoke carefully, choosing every word. Sir, the emitters are functioning correctly. The Marshal looked up. Then why are they falling behind? Because they were never designed to maintain this level of output against targets that continue advancing. The answer hung in the air. Nobody had considered that possibility because nobody believed such targets could exist. Inside Iron One, Sergeant Michael Carter looked over the latest system report. External damage. Daniel Foster answered without hesitation. Within expected limits. Engine. Running clean. Olivia Brooks smiled while guiding the tank over another rise. Feels like we are on a training course back home. Chris Ramirez looked through the periscope toward the distant objective markers. Funny thing is, they keep trying to stop the tank. Michael nodded. They should have been trying to stop the crew. Years of training had taught them that hardware alone never decided the outcome. The machine existed to give ordinary people enough time to solve extraordinary problems. Jack had repeated that lesson so many times that every member of the armored division could finish the sentence before he did. Far above the proving grounds, autonomous camera drones continued broadcasting every second to billions of viewers. Military academies across the galaxy canceled scheduled lectures as instructors gathered students around live feeds. Analysts who had arrived expecting to explain why traditional armor had disappeared from history now found themselves rewriting notes in complete silence. One retired admiral from Earth's delegation quietly watched the broadcast beside several younger officers. A cadet finally asked the question everyone had been thinking. Sir, when did humanity realize everyone else was making this mistake? The old admiral smiled without taking his eyes off the screen. We did not. The cadet looked confused. Then how did we prepare for it? Because we never stopped preparing for failure. The younger officers remained silent. The admiral continued. Most civilizations build equipment that performs beautifully when every system works exactly as planned. We build equipment assuming something important will eventually break. That difference changes everything. Back at the command platform, Rebecca folded her tablet closed. The flood of incoming requests had become impossible to keep up with. Every major defense ministry wanted meetings. Every research institute wanted data. Every reporter wanted an interview. Jack ignored all of it. His attention remained fixed on the convoy moving steadily across the final stretch of ground. There was no dramatic charge, no desperate rush, just disciplined crews following procedures they had practiced for years. The objective markers stood only a few hundred yards ahead now. Around the stadium, nobody spoke anymore. The laughter from earlier felt like it belonged to another lifetime. The galaxy had arrived expecting to witness the end of an old idea. Instead, it was watching the collapse of an assumption it had carried for centuries. Humanity had not brought relics onto a modern battlefield. Humanity had brought a way of thinking that everyone else had forgotten. By the time the lead tanks rolled across the final objective line, nobody cared about the score anymore. The demonstration had become something much larger than a military exercise. It had become an uncomfortable conversation that every civilization in attendance would be forced to have with itself. The proving grounds fell strangely quiet as automated systems confirmed that every required checkpoint had been reached. No alarms sounded. No dramatic announcements filled the air. Just a simple line of text appeared across every display in the stadium. Human Armored Division objective complete. Captain Jack Sullivan took a slow breath and finally lowered his binoculars. Rebecca Hayes looked toward him with a smile that carried equal parts relief and disbelief. "You knew we could do it." Jack shook his head. "No." She frowned. "You did not. I knew the machines could." He looked toward the crews climbing through another stretch of open ground. The people still had to prove it. A few moments later, the Supreme Defense Marshal walked away from his command station and crossed the observation platform himself. Every camera followed him. Reporters expected outrage. Some expected excuses. Others expected accusations that Earth had hidden forbidden technology. Instead, the Marshal stopped a few feet from Jack and studied him for several silent seconds. "Captain Sullivan," he finally said, "I have reviewed every sensor log available to my command." Jack nodded politely. "I assumed you would. Your vehicles used no defensive energy shields." "Correct. No classified field distortion." "Correct. No unknown particle technology." Jack smiled faintly. "No." The Marshal folded his hands behind his back. "Then answer one question." Rebecca glanced toward Jack, curious herself. Why? The single word hung in the air. Not why build tanks. Not why attend the demonstration. Why continue investing in an idea the rest of the galaxy had abandoned centuries ago? Jack looked past the Marshal toward the convoy where crew members were already inspecting tracks, wiping dust from optics, and checking equipment as naturally as mechanics finishing another long workday. He thought about his father working beneath an old pickup in the Texas heat. He thought about young soldiers learning to repair engines with grease on their hands instead of relying on perfect software. He thought about every engineer who had quietly ignored fashionable opinions and kept solving practical problems instead. Then he answered, "Because every civilization builds weapons that reflect what it believes about the future." The Marshal listened without interrupting. "Most of you believed future wars would become cleaner, faster, and more predictable. Humanity never believed that." Jack looked directly into the Marshal's eyes. "We believe confusion survives every generation. Equipment fails. Weather changes. Communications break. Good plans fall apart. So we build machines that give ordinary people another chance after the first mistake." Around them, nobody moved. Every microphone captured every word. Jack continued in the same calm voice. "You spent centuries asking how to build weapons that never miss. We spent the same centuries asking how to keep moving after being hit." The Marshal slowly looked back toward the silent line of steel resting beneath the afternoon sun. For the first time since the demonstration began, he no longer saw obsolete machines. He saw a philosophy. Across the observation galleries, officers from dozens of worlds quietly closed their tablets. Nobody was interested in arguing anymore. They had arrived believing humanity had challenged laser technology. They left understanding something entirely different. Humanity had challenged certainty itself, and certainty had lost. Years passed before the military academies of the galaxy finally agreed on what to call that afternoon. Some named it the Steel Lesson. Others called it the Doctrine of Endurance. A few simply referred to it as the day certainty failed. The title never mattered very much. The lesson did. Training manuals quietly changed. Engineering schools reopened research programs that had been abandoned for centuries. Young officers who had once laughed at heavy armor were suddenly assigned courses on redundancy, field repairs, thermal management, and mechanical reliability. Not because humanity had forced anyone to change, but because reality had. Captain Jack Sullivan never stayed long enough to watch any of it happen. A week after the demonstration, he was back in Texas wearing blue jeans instead of a field jacket, standing outside his father's old workshop with a cup of black coffee in his hand. The same pickup truck they had repaired together years earlier still sat beneath the oak tree. The paint had faded. The engine rattled a little when it started. It was far from perfect. Jack smiled every time he drove it. One Saturday morning, a neighbor stopped by after seeing the galactic broadcast replayed on television for what felt like the 100th time. "You really changed military history," the man said with a grin. Jack looked down at the wrench in his hand before answering. "Not really. Come on. Everybody is talking about you." Jack shrugged. "They should be talking about the cruise." The neighbor laughed. "You are too humble." Jack tightened one final bolt before closing the truck's hood. "No, I am just old enough to know that machines do not earn trust. People do." Across the galaxy, the Supreme Defense Marshal kept a framed photograph inside his office. It did not show laser arrays or advanced technology. It showed a line of dusty steel vehicles moving steadily across open ground beneath a bright afternoon sky. Whenever young commanders visited his headquarters asking how to prepare for the next century of warfare, he pointed to that picture instead of the newest weapon on display. "Do not ask what your enemy built," he would tell them. "Ask what they believed when they built it." Rebecca Hayes eventually returned to Earth as well. During an interview at a university, one student asked whether humanity had planned every detail of the demonstration years in advance. Rebecca smiled because she remembered standing beside Jack when the laughter echoed through the stadium. "No," she answered. "We plan to be ready." Those are not the same thing. The student wrote the sentence down without realizing it would stay with him for the rest of his life. Readiness was never about predicting every challenge. It was about building the character to keep moving when predictions failed. Somewhere, another generation of young mechanics began learning how to repair engines with worn tools and steady hands. Somewhere else, another engineer chose reliability over fashion. Another commander reminded a nervous crew that calm decisions mattered more than perfect equipment. None of them were trying to repeat history. They were quietly preparing for whatever history might become. Long after the broadcasts faded and the headlines disappeared, people remembered one truth that reached far beyond battlefields, governments, or machines. Life rarely rewards those who chase perfection. More often, it rewards those who refuse to stop when perfection disappears. That was the real reason the galaxy never forgot the humans. It was never because they trusted steel more than light. It was because, when everyone else believed strength came from having flawless tools, humanity quietly proved that the greatest strength had always come from ordinary people who kept moving forward together, one steady step at a time.